Welcome to a presentation from the Academic Writing Program at the University of Maryland. I'm Beth Colson, a lecturer in the Academic Writing Program. In English 101, you'll spend a good deal of time sifting through sources to find the most appropriate ones to support your arguments. So how will you know if you're finding the most appropriate ones or the best sources? One important thing to remember as you research is that academics rely on the research of other academics to make their claims. Academics do not argue in a vacuum, and rarely does a new academic topic emerge out of thin air. So how do you know if the source that you think is perfect for proving your claim is an academic one? How can you tell the difference between a popular or a scholarly source? Well, in this presentation, you'll learn how to distinguish popular sources from scholarly sources, find out what trade magazines are, and if you can use those, and discover the best places to find scholarly sources. Popular sources and scholarly sources come in many varieties, but there are general characteristics that you can check to see if you're dealing with a popular or scholarly source. Some of those characteristics involve the source's appearance, the source's audience, the authors of the source, the purpose, and the scope of the content of the article. The documentation and references, if they're listed or if they're used. Is there an abstract included? And the writing style of the article. In general, you'll find that most popular sources have a glossy cover if it's in print, has colorful and sometimes humorous cover art designed to attract readers, and contains advertisements. If you see an advertisement for a product, then it's a good bet you're looking at a popular source. Popular sources are written for a general audience and a lay audience, and most often the articles in such magazines are written by journalists or other writers who are not experts in the field. You'll find that most popular articles do not give the author's credentials along with the article, and sometimes you might find no author at all. You also notice that the language is targeted to a general audience and that the authors do not directly cite their sources. Writers for a popular source might summarize a scientific study, but they don't directly report on their own findings. Some of the features of the popular sources include the following. As you can see here, the content often contains current events, and general interests. It definitely contains glossy photographs. Sometimes the content relates to entertainment, or it may contain advertisements aimed at a particular or general audience. And the content is written for the average readers. For example, these columns on Alzheimer's and rheumatoid arthritis are brief and informative. They just define the basics. They don't go into detail about the research. And the author in this one, his or her qualifications are not mentioned. It was probably written by an employee of the magazine. Finally, you want to ask yourself whether the popular source you are considering using is reliable. Many students, for example, see an article from the New York Times and think, well, the Times is a good newspaper, and that information should be fine for my paper in English 101. But while this might be a good source to find some background information on a particular topic, such as is digital media rewiring our brains, it's not a definitive scientific study that provides conclusive evidence that you can rely on. Remember that popular sources may or may not be copy edited and proofread for correctness. Now, the New York Times is, but very often popular sources, especially blogs, are not. And also remember that papers often print retractions the day after a story is run. Popular sources often do not cite the sources of information, and they are not peer-reviewed. In fact, the critical difference between scholarly and popular articles is that scholarly articles almost always undergo peer review, a process by which submitted manuscripts are read and critiqued by their experts in a given field in order to determine their novelty and accuracy. This is different from articles in popular journals, which are most often simply accepted or rejected by an editor who may or may not be an expert in a given topic. Finally, notice the language of the writing style of a popular article is very different than that of a scholarly source. In this New York Times article, for example, about is the digital media rewiring our brains, you'll notice the colloquial terms such as gadgets and things, which are fine for a lay reader who wants to be entertained and informed, but such imprecision is not likely to be found in an academic source. Also, notice just the conversational style. This is your brain on computers. It's something you might hear in an advertisement, you might see it on a bumper sticker, or you might see it in a popular article. But again, probably won't find it in an academic article. Well, where do you usually find popular sources? Well, the first place, you're probably going to find them as newspapers and magazines. Second, you might find them on wiki sites such as Wikipedia. You might find them in blogs or trade journals or corporate websites, press releases, news programs, and Congressional Quarterly Researcher, or off the database LexisNexis. In fact, most peer-reviewed journals are found in electronic databases and in print, but some are available online, whereas most popular sources are always available online. So what about this source? Would you say it's popular or academic? A name like Science Daily might make you think that this is a peer-reviewed site for scientific studies, but a second glance will have you noticing some features that are definitely popular. Notice first that this website features advertisements for antivirus computer software and for a particular pharmaceutical company. Also, this source reports on a scientific study and summarizes its findings, but it's not the study itself. However, this source does list the study's bibliographic information, so you can find the original data. So it's a good background source to begin with. There's another kind of source to consider besides popular and academic sources, just to complicate the situation. That's the trade publication. A trade magazine, or also called a professional magazine, is published with the intention of target marketing to a specific industry or type of trade. Trade magazines typically contain advertising content focused on the industry in question with little, if any, general audience advertising. They also generally contain industry-specific job notices. You should consider many trade publications to be news magazines with a very specific topical focus. Some instances, however, the boundary between trade publication and peer-reviewed journal is blurred. One such example is Biotechniques, which contains peer-reviewed technical reports and technology reviews, while containing heavy advertising content. And a significant portion of the articles in this particular trade journal are authored by or are in collaboration with vendors who advertise in the same issue. Examples of trade publications include Advertising Age, American Builder, American Nurse, Director for the Funeral Industry, Education Week, Food Technology, Landscape Architecture, Marketing Week, Music Week, and Radio. Many of these can also be found online. Some identifying features of a trade publication include the following. Notice that the contents often include upcoming calendars and events, and they'll list trainings and seminars and trade shows. The articles are written for and contain content of interest to people in the industry. This particular publication is taken for a trade publication for arborists. These also contain glossy photographs and illustration, and it contains industry-related advertisements. How do you know if it's a trade publication or a scholarly source? Well, the best way is to look for the following characteristics. Is it written for a knowledgeable audience? Is a basic familiarity with the topic that's being covered assumed? Does it intend to inform? Publications in scholarly journals allow researchers to communicate new findings and novel findings. Is it written by experts in a given field? Is it directed to scholars and experts in a particular field? Is it longer in length? Most scholarly journals are much longer in length than a popular article. And does it include graphs, charts, visuals, and tables, not just glossy photographs? Other things to look for include that it lists the author's credentials and the university organization for whom they work. It describes the research methodology, the research used. It contains a bibliography of works cited. It is reviewed by peers prior to publication. It is written in response to part of a scholarly conversation about a particular research topic. And its goal is to disseminate new information, research, and theories so that scholars can further investigate a particular research topic. What are some features of a scholarly article? Well, you generally notice that the author's credentials are given at the beginning of the article or sometimes at the end. It most often begins with an abstract. It contains language that is subject-specific. It has a list of references, a works cited, a bibliography, footnotes or endnotes, or some other form of list of sources at the end. And they often contain charts, graphs, and diagrams to illustrate research findings. How does a scholarly source credit the research? Well, it lists the author's credentials and affiliations. It includes the graphs and data, case studies, and original research. You can see the list of references or works cited at the end of this particular article in Nature on rewiring the adult brain. And interestingly enough, this is the same article that was referred to in the New York Times article. This is the original research. And it uses subject-specific language. Speaking of the language, let's take a look at this. Notice this passage from Nature on the same subject as that New York Times article. Notice how very different it is. In a study of the effect of retinal lesions on adult primary visual cortex, Smirnikis et al. Propose that there is no cortical reorganization. Unless you're an expert in this field, you're probably not going to know what retinal lesions are or cortical reorganization. It's even hard to pronounce for me. And also notice how often this article credits other research. Smirnikis et al., in light of the large body of earlier work that demonstrates cortical plasticity. And then at the end, from more than 20 studies in 3 species, see reference 2 through 6, for example. This is clearly an academic article. Well, where do you find scholarly sources? Peer-reviewed journals, peer-reviewed websites, government agency websites, such as the National Criminal Justice Reference Service, professional society websites, and Academic Search Premier. Now, Academic Search Premier is one of the databases that can be found on the University of Maryland's library website. It's also one where you can also find popular articles on your topic as well. So how do you get to scholarly articles using Academic Search Premier? To ensure that you only receive peer-reviewed articles in your search, make sure that when you're using Academic Search Premier, after you've typed in your search terms, that you also click the box Scholarly Peer-Reviewed Journals to limit your search to only peer-reviewed sources. If you were searching then for sources related to violence in video games, using the scholarly source limiter, you'll only get sources that come from peer-reviewed journals, such as the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology or Social Behavior and Personality, an international journal. You won't get any articles from the New York Times or Time Magazine. So to review, the University of Maryland's library has provided you with a quick comparison of the three different kinds of sources that you may find in your research. Some key differences to note are the peer review process and in the purpose and reference category. For scholarly articles, the purpose is to introduce new research results and findings to advance knowledge in a field, whereas for trade and popular sources, the goal is to inform or to entertain. Also notice the difference in references. With scholarly journals, the references are always included, whereas with trade, they may be included, and in popular sources, rarely, if ever, are they included. If you're still not sure about a source, you have a few other resources you can go to. You can always ask a reference librarian here at the University of Maryland. Go to the library's website and click on the Ask Us link that you can see here to the left, or ask your English 101 instructor, or check with the Writing Center, and good luck evaluating your sources.